They built 35 homes on his land, without his permission, without his signature, without his blessing. And when he had finally had enough, he walked down to that dam on his property and opened it. What happened next shocked everyone, but it all started with a fight that went much deeper than water. This is not just a story about property lines or paperwork. This is about power. This is about what happens when someone thinks they can take from you just because they believe you won't fight back. This is about a black man who watched people move onto his land, watched them build 35 homes on top of it, and then decided to remind them who really owned it. But the story isn't as simple as just flooding some houses. There's history here, struggle here, and a lesson that every single person watching this should hear. Let's start with the basics. Owning land is one of the most powerful things in America. For centuries, land has been tied to wealth, freedom, and security. But for black families, keeping land has never been simple. From the end of slavery all the way through today, black landowners have faced constant battles. Shady developers, crooked politicians, and even their own neighbors trying to take what's theirs. In this case, it wasn't just one greedy neighbor. It was an entire homeowners association, an HOA, who decided that one man's property was theirs to build on. HOAs are supposed to keep neighborhoods organized, collect fees, and maintain order. But anyone who's lived under an HOA knows how much power they can hold. And when you mix that power with land, race, and greed, things can get real ugly. This man owned land that his family had worked hard to protect. And when developers and the HOA set their eyes on it, they didn't knock on his door with respect. They didn't offer him a fair deal. They just built 35 homes on his land. Imagine waking up and seeing strangers moving into houses that you never agreed to put there. Imagine watching concrete poured and roofs raised, knowing it was all happening illegally, but feeling like no one in power cared. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear what happened when he tried to fight back in court. Now, before we even get to that dam, because trust me, you're going to want to hear about that, we need to talk about how something like this even happens. How does an HOA, with lawyers and board members, just decide to build on someone's land? The truth is, land theft from black owners has been happening for generations. After the Civil War, newly freed black families fought tooth and nail to buy land. By 1910, black farmers owned around 16 million acres in the United States, but through intimidation, violence, legal loopholes, and straight-up fraud, most of that land was stripped away. Today, over 90% of that land is gone, and it's not because people sold it willingly. It's because they were pushed out, tricked, or ignored. So when this man saw homes being built on his property, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting against a system that's been robbing people who look like him for centuries. The HOA thought they could bully him. They thought their lawyers and their money could bury him in paperwork and legal fees. And at first, they were right. Court after court delayed, stalled, or sided with the developers. That's the part they don't show you on the glossy brochures of new neighborhoods. The fact that behind those smiling families moving into fresh houses, there's sometimes a story of someone else losing everything. This man tried the proper way. He went to the courts. He filed complaints. He demanded answers. But the HOA had money, connections, and influence. He was just one man. And while he was fighting in legal paperwork, the houses kept rising. Now let's pause here, because this is bigger than one case. This is a pattern. Across the South, across the Midwest, across the entire country, black landowners have stories just like this. Stories of developers who show up with bulldozers before they ever show up with contracts. Stories of sheriffs who enforce eviction notices without checking the details. Stories of families who lose land that's been in their bloodline for 100 years, all because someone else decided their signature didn't matter. And if you're sitting there thinking, how can something like this even be legal? The truth is, most of the time it is. But when you've got money, when you've got political connections, and when the people you're taking from are the ones society has ignored for generations, you can get away with almost anything. Almost. Because this man wasn't about to just roll over and watch his family's land disappear. And here, where things get interesting, remember that dam I mentioned earlier. That dam was on his property, which means the water behind it was his to control. And while the courts were slow, water moves fast. And when he opened it, those 35 homes didn't stand a chance. But before we get to the sound of rushing water and people screaming as basements filled, let me take you inside his head. Think about the anger building up inside of him as he watched those houses go up. Think about the nights he spent staring at court documents, knowing the system was stacked against him. Think about the disrespect of watching families barbecue in backyards that weren't even legally theirs. Every nail, every brick, every roof shingle, it was like another slap in the face. And then one day he decided enough was enough. He walked to that dam. He grabbed the mechanism that held the water back, and he let it go. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear what the HOA tried to do after the flood. But to really understand the weight of that decision, let's rewind for a moment and talk about why land means so much. Land isn't just dirt. For black families, especially in the South, land has always been about survival. Land meant you didn't have to depend on someone else to feed your family. Land meant freedom when the world wanted you trapped in low-paying jobs. Land meant legacy. Parents could pass it down to children and children to their children. That's why developers and HOAs going after land hurts so deeply. They're not just taking acres, they're taking futures. And the courts, they don't always care about futures. They care about who can pay the highest lawyer fees. They care about who donates to campaigns. They care about paperwork more than people. So when the system failed him, he turned to something more powerful, nature itself. Picture it, the dam creaks as the gates open. The water that had been still and quiet suddenly roars. It rushes forward unstoppable. Lawns, fences, basements swallowed. The same families who thought they could sit comfortably in stolen houses now had to scramble as the ground beneath them betrayed their illusion of security. It was justice, not in a courtroom but in the rawest way possible. And here's the kicker. The HOA still tried to twist it. They ran to the media. They filed lawsuits. They claimed he had destroyed their property. But whose property was it really? That's the question that echoes louder than the sound of that flood. The water tore through that neighborhood like a reminder. It rushed into basements, tore up lawns, and made it crystal clear that the land wasn't theirs. People screamed. Cars floated. Everything the HOA thought they controlled came crashing down under the force of something they could never really own: nature. Now here's the part that really hits. After the flood, instead of admitting their mistake, instead of apologizing, the HOA doubled down. They tried to paint him as the criminal. They tried to drag him back into court, saying he had destroyed property, saying he was dangerous. But how do you destroy property on land that wasn't theirs to begin with? How do you get called a criminal for defending what's legally yours? This is where the story turns into more than just one man versus an HOA. This is about perception. When you're black in America, even when you're right, they'll try to make you wrong. Even when you defend what's yours, they'll try to call it an attack. And that's why this story matters. Because it wasn't just about flooding some houses. It was about refusing to be erased. In the end, this fight wasn't just about land. It was about dignity. It was about a man saying, "You will not take from me and pretend I don't exist." The HOA thought they could outsmart him with money and paperwork, but he reminded them that land, water, and truth are stronger than lies. This story is a piece of a much bigger history, a history of black landowners being pushed aside, ignored, or stolen from. And yet, time and time again, we see people stand up and say, "No more." So now, let's dig into that bigger picture. Because what happened with the man, the HOA, and the dam wasn't just some random one-off. No, this was part of a long, ugly, repeating pattern in America. And if you've ever wondered how 35 houses can just pop up on someone's land without permission, the truth is, it's been happening for generations. Here's the thing about land. Land isn't just soil. It isn't just trees and grass. Land is power. Land is freedom. Land is legacy. And for black families, owning land was one of the only ways to escape generations of poverty and dependence. But that same land, that symbol of independence, has also been the biggest target for people who didn't want black families to succeed. In 1910, black farmers owned around 16 million acres of land in the United States. 16 million. That was after just a few decades of freedom from slavery. But fast forward to today and over 90% of that land is gone. Not because families just decided to sell. No, it was stolen through violence, through intimidation, through D. You've probably heard the name Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Greenwood District. Back in the early 1900s, it was one of the wealthiest black communities in America. Stores, banks, doctors, lawyers, families living in nice homes they built with their own hands. But in 1921, all of it was destroyed, burned to the ground, and not by accident. White mobs, backed by police, stormed the community, killing hundreds of people and leveling 35 blocks of homes and businesses. That's 35 blocks. Think about the number 35. In Part 1, it was 35 homes. Here, it was 35 blocks, both stolen in different ways, but both ripping away land and legacy from black families. And after the fires stopped, the city didn't help. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. Courts didn't force anyone to rebuild or pay damages. Families who had worked for decades were left with ashes. Just like the man with the dam, they were erased on paper and in reality. And if you think Tulsa was the only one, it was. Across the country, thriving black communities were bulldozed, burned, or paved over for highways. It wasn't just random, it was intentional. Now let's move to Hilton Head, South Carolina. Beautiful beaches, resorts, golf courses. But behind all that tourist shine is another story of stolen land. The Gullah Geechee people, descendants of enslaved Africans, had held onto land there for generations. They built communities, farms, and churches. But when developers wanted the land, they used something called partition sales. Here, how it works. If a piece of land is passed down to multiple heirs, even if 20 people own it, all it takes is one heir, just one, to decide they want out. Developers buy that one heir's share, then go to court and force the whole property to be sold. Families lose everything, and developers get valuable land for cheap. Completely legal, completely unfair. That's the kind of trick that could turn 35 homes into a nightmare for one man with a dam. Because the law doesn't always protect the people it's supposed to. And for black families, it almost never has. So when the man in Part 1 opened that dam, it wasn't just about water flooding basements. It was about history flooding back. It was about anger, frustration, and pain breaking loose after being held back for too long. Think about how symbolic that is. Water being held behind a dam, pressure building, time ticking. That's the same way black families have felt for decades watching their land slip away. Pressure building, anger rising, and eventually something has to break. And here's the truth. For every one story we hear about, there are 100 more we don't. Families too poor to fight in court. Families who don't make the news when their land gets taken. Families who just pack up and leave because they don't know what else to do. That's why this story matters. That's why telling it in detail matters. Because without stories like this, people forget. They think land loss is just bad luck or poor choices, but the reality is much darker. Not everyone has a dam to open. Not everyone has water as a weapon, but resistance takes many forms. Some families chain themselves to trees to stop bulldozers. Others rally communities to raise money and buy land back piece by piece. Some take their cases all the way to the Supreme Court, trying to change the laws that make partition sales possible. Every act of resistance, big or small, is part of the same flood. A flood of voices saying, "No, you will not erase us. You will not take from us and pretend it never happened." And if you think the courts, the HOAs, the developers always win, you'd be wrong. Because history has also shown us families who fought back and won. Families who held onto their land despite every trick in the book. Families who passed it down so that today, generations later, kids can still run in the same fields their ancestors once walked. At the end of the day, this story, the man, the dam, the HOA, the flood, leaves us with one real question. Who gets to own America? Who gets to decide whose land matters and whose does? Because when 35 homes rise on stolen land, that's not just a mistake. That's a choice. A choice backed by money, power, and the belief that one man's voice didn't matter. But it did matter. His voice mattered. His actions mattered. And now his story matters. And the more we tell stories like his, the more we shine a light on the patterns people want to hide. The more we remember Tulsa. The more we remember Hilton Head. The more we remember the Reals family. And the more we realize this isn't just history. It's still happening right now. So when you hear about a dam being opened, don't just picture water. Picture generations of anger breaking loose. Picture a man saying, "You can build 35 homes, you can bring all the lawyers you want, but this is still my land." And the next time you drive through a polished neighborhood, ask yourself, what story is hidden under these foundations? Who was here before the white fences and the golf courses? What family was pushed aside so someone else could move in? Because the truth is, behind almost every piece of land in this country, there's a story. And some of those stories are about survival. Some of them are about theft. And some of them, like this one, are about resistance. And if you thought this flood was the end of the story, think again. Because the fight for black land is still going on. In courts, in legislatures, in neighborhoods, and in families who refuse to let their history be washed away. So if you got value from this, subscribe. Because we've got more stories they don't want you to hear. Subscribe if you want more stories they don't want you to hear.